Welcome to Watching Trees Grow, a podcast by Troutwood. I'm Gene Natali, co-founder and CEO of Troutwood. In today's episode, we're going to use the power of hindsight to share experiences with a credit card. If you've been following along the journey, two of our colleagues, Maggie and Aruj, shared their experiences from opening and attempting to open their first credit card. As the entire Troutwood team was following along that journey, another of our colleagues said, "Hey, Gene, would it be all right if I share my story? It's a little bit different than what Aruj and Maggie experienced." Christen Malone, our brand and marketing officer, is going to share mistakes that she made with a credit card. So I commend that courage, and I'm looking forward to hearing it myself. This will be my first time. But I want to make a fairly bold statement to our community in advance of this episode. If you have questions, you aren't alone. I've personally given talks to a lot of audiences and regularly have audience members wait in line after those talks to ask questions because they were nervous to ask it, thinking they were the only one with that question. Hear me when I say you are not alone. And I think Christen's story today will help to build on that point. Christen, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh my goodness! Thank you for the courage to share your story. I'm looking to hear it. How many years of credit card experience do you have?
17.
And has it all been positive?
No.
did it start positive?
No.
Well, I cannot wait to let's go right to where we went with Maggie and Aruj. Back in time, tell us about opening your first credit card.
So I actually got my first credit card by applying for one on my college campus, which I know is not even really a thing anymore. Credit card companies aren't even allowed to do that now. But in the early 2000s, credit card companies and banks would basically just stand in the quad and you would apply right on the spot on your way to class, which in hindsight, probably shouldn't have been giving out my social security number to just some, rando with a clipboard on campus. But in 2005, I was 20 years old, got my first credit card with no cosigner. And I think the limit on that card was around $5,000. It was high.
I would love to be inside Aruj's head right now as he hears how easy that was for you with the experiences that he has shared. Chris, and I'll date myself. It was the same. I got my first credit card because there was a sign if you got a Pittsburgh Pirates hat if you open a credit card on the campus. It's nice that that's changed. What happened? So and let me ask, did you get like a free beach towel or a t-shirt or anything when you opened your credit card?
Yeah, so I picked this particular card because it actually had my school mascot on it, and I thought it was really cool. So I applied for that. I also, I think I got a tote bag, and I distinctly remember iTunes gift cards being like the big giveaway that was really big in 2005. So I was definitely more drawn to the rewards and the prestige of just having a credit card versus what it actually meant to own a credit card. Obviously, in hindsight, that sounds really terrible.
Mm-hmm. Christen, that is extremely interesting because when Maggie and Aruj were going through their process of what to look for, they weren't looking for a Pittsburgh Pirates hat or a college campus logo. So I think hopefully they're a sign of how much more sophisticated that search has become. What happened after you got approved?
Well, the first big mistake that I'm sure a lot of our listeners will sympathize with was that I did get it without really understanding what I was in for. So, just it's kind of just this ambiguous thing, and not knowing that what you put on it, you have to make a payment every month. You have no matter what, if you're carrying a balance, you have to make a payment. So this is a little bit embarrassing, but I actually ended up charging an entire spring break trip on my credit card, and my parents were not happy about that. I think my dad even had to step in once to make a payment for me just so I wouldn't, my parents knew it was my first card. They did not want me to get started off on the wrong foot. And lucky for me, I did have parents that were very conscientious of money. And, my parents actually used that as an opportunity to help me understand why maxing out a credit card is the absolute worst thing you can do. And that is not how you build good credit. So for my punishment, I actually spent that entire summer afterwards. I worked 2 jobs. I'm pretty sure I was working like 60 or 70 hours a week. And I had to pay off that entire card. So,
well, a 60 or 70-hour work week at that age beats carrying that debt for longer.
yes.
Too.
Yeah.
Kristen, I'm curious, the friends that you went on spring break with, I'm speculating and also experienced similar stories. They probably all thought the same thing, right? This is great. We can get a credit card to go on spring break.
Yeah. And, as I was saying that, I was thinking in particularly of one friend that I did go on spring break with. And I actually don't know what this person's financial situation was. But, I'm 37 now. And I do have friends I go on trips with now. And I feel like I would ask my friends, hey, like, can you afford to go on this trip before we book it, instead of just, oh my God, yeah, I have a credit card, let's go. It's definitely a much different experience now.
I hope our younger audience members hear that. Can I afford it? Ask that question before doing it, because I speculate that no matter how great spring break it was, those 60, 70-hour work weeks probably had some thoughts going through your head.
Yeah, a little bit. And one of my jobs was actually at a car wash. And I'm just retelling this story. I'm thinking about those like 100-degree days where I am standing on asphalt and I'm like taking money from people. And, when I possibly could have like been at the pool, but here I am making $9 an hour, whatever, which was a lot in 2005. But yeah, that was not how I wanted to spend that summer.
But it's an anchor. If you let that credit card continue to build, it's an anchor. So was that expedient? It sounds like you learned from that experience, but I don't want to make that assumption. Were you credit card debt free after that?
For a little bit I was. So I got out of school with very little student debt, which was awesome. I did feel like I kind of had a little bit of a leg up. I was able to, get a car when I got my first job and all that kind of stuff. But I did not learn my lesson. Later on in my adult life, I had just moved out on my own. I used a credit card to buy a TV and ended up missing a couple of payments on that. And it actually took me a couple years to rebuild my credit from that point. And mind you, I had already had a auto loan underneath my belt at that point. So auto loans boost your credit a lot, especially if you're making on-time payments and you pay it off. And then I made this one stupid mistake, and took me a couple years to recover from that.
So I know Rouge is listening in the background right now. I'm going to give a homework assignment, because you used your credit card and then you got an auto loan. Mm-hmm. And when we've had this journey with Maggie and Rouge, they're talking about the importance of building their credit score to be able to do things like that. So I think we do a little bit more of investigative reporting of how I get an auto loan without a credit score. My mind's thinking probably cosigner, but I'm really curious to put this whole puzzle together.
Yeah.
So what happened after that experience? How long did that credit card debt kind of live with you?
So I actually ended up going into default on that card because I knew that it was a negative on your credit score, but I think I was still just young and dumb and I don't know, maybe a little, probably very arrogant. And I thought, well, that'll just work itself out at some point. It'll eventually drop off, which it does, but you're locked to that. Every time someone pulls your credit after that, they see a delinquency on your credit score. And that is an immediate no. It doesn't matter what else you did beyond that. But it did take me a couple years to clear that. And I actually had to push off even applying for a mortgage beyond just to build my credit.
There's a lot in that statement you just made, from having to delay buying a mortgage. But you said two big words I'd like to focus: default and delinquency. When you said that, you said very casually, "Oh, I defaulted on that." What did that mean? Did the credit card company just say, "Oh, Kristen, so sorry, you can't use it again," or what was that experience?
Yeah. So when you default, it means that they take that credit card from you and they sell off that debt. So they've basically determined at that point that they're not going to get that money from you. So they sell it off to a credit. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I can't think of the word. Debt collector. Yeah. They sell it off to a debt collector.
Well, and I want to just So it is okay to use a credit card for big purchases, but we have to put a
Mhm.
big if from this experience that we just learned. If you can
Mhm.
afford to pay it back. And as
Yep.
Aruj and Maggie were shopping for credit cards, they both were looking for cards with awards or points that would help give them like a little bit of a boost if they paid it back in full. So
Mhm.
the point of this isn't like don't be nervous to use a credit card for big expenditures, but to Kristen's earlier statement that I have now bold-faced in my notes, can you afford it? If you could have paid the credit card back, you would not have defaulted.
Right. And you have to account for things like at that time I, had lost my job. So I was in the process of finding a new job. And it's at that point, do you really want to use your savings to pay off a credit card when you need that
Mm-hmm.
for food and gas and groceries? So just looking ahead and thinking in terms of, well, yeah, of course I can afford that amount every month. Well, what happens if your financial situation changes? And that's what happened to me. So it wasn't by choice. I just said, oh, forget it. I'm just going to stop paying it. It really came down to, well, I have to decide what I'm going to
Yeah.
use my savings on.
Well, and Kristen, for maybe students hearing this conversation in a personal finance class, or because a mom or dad said, "Hey, listen," or maybe the student is taking a young, Gen Z working professional taking ownership of their financial future.
Mm-hmm.
They're probably saying, "Well, why didn't she know?" And I think it's worth pointing out. I don't know about you. I never had a personal finance class. I never even had the option of a personal finance class. And I was an econ major in college and a finance major in grad school. So you had to learn, unfortunately, by doing. And while mistakes are preventable, trial and error is a tough way to learn.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens when you default? Was it a clean reset? You mentioned after that, you said default, and then you said I had to delay getting a mortgage for a home. Why? Walk us through how you learned that.
So if you default on something and it goes to a collections agency, you're going to get a ton of phone calls because they want their money. They bought that debt at a lower amount from this credit card company, and now they are trying to recoup some of that money back. So they're just going to keep calling you, keep trying to get in touch with you, and eventually they stop. It's at least a year. It's a long time to endure that, but if you completely just blow through it and don't pay, a negative goes on your credit score. So anytime you try to apply for something, that shows up. And after a few years, you can petition the credit agencies to have that removed. So that's basically what I ended up doing, is just waiting it out. You have the option when you go into default. You can either pay a settled amount. So let's say you owe $1,000 and you call, and a company calls you and they say, you owe $1,000. Can you pay us? And you say, no, I only have $200. They'll take that as you could come up with an agreement with them, and they'll take that amount, and you have on your credit score kind of a yellow mark instead of like a red mark. It just means like, hey, this person had a mistake, but they did their best to rectify it, as opposed to this person just never paid that amount. In which case, either of those later down the road, you can petition to have removed from your credit score. But it's a really tough process. You have to submit some paperwork, and you have to follow up, and it takes about 30 days. And then you have to go back and have it removed from each individual credit reporting agency. So it's a lot of work to go through that.
And it can take years to recover from bad credit events, which just giant shout out to the educators that are focusing on this subject, to parents that are having this conversation with kids, and for, young professionals taking ownership. Chris, I just want to clarify one, when you say default, it's not like you just get that letter, that phone call. There is a delinquency period prior to that default where the credit card company says, hey, I told you this was a legal obligation. You're past due. That window's 90 days. After that 90 days, though, if you haven't made those payments. So students, I think this is, it's so easy to read a textbook or to, see how to do it correctly in a video. There's so much power that comes from learning, candidly, just being blunt, how not to do it, right, Kristen? Like these, I admire that you were willing to share these. I'm curious, with what you know now, what would you have done differently?
Oh man, I would not have bought that TV, for starters. And I probably would have actually asked my parents for advice first before opening a credit card. I didn't even realize just how disciplined my parents are with finance and credit card use, and still are. I'm actually, in my late 30s, understanding just how good, my parents were and how regimented they were in budgeting and, not using credit cards and everything. And, now seeing them be able to kind of reap the benefits from that. So I probably would have started with them. But I was a teenager that knew more than my parents at that time. So that probably would have been my number one thing, was starting with someone who knew and asking them.
Yeah, we don't realize how smart our parents were.
Very true.
Christen, I wrote just the 2 summary points I wrote down for our audience. Ask, can you afford it?
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't know, ask someone, because money mistakes have consequences. I'm on record. I believe this is the single most important subject. Christen, stories like this are why. It doesn't matter if you're a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, an auto mechanic, a plumber, an engineer, you're making money choices, and it's an equal playing field. If you make a mistake, you pay for it. I don't do this often. I'm going to take us off in a concluding little short story on my own, non-finance, but I did not have to use a credit card for a TV because I won a TV at my high school prom. And I used this little box TV for more years than I care to share. It's a little money frugality there if you get lucky enough to win a TV at your high school prom.
Actually, the TV I bought recently just died. It probably is one of the longest standing electronics in my house. So,
well, you had a good relationship with it then. Christen, thank you for this today. I very much appreciate it. Thank you for tuning in to Watching Trees Grow, a podcast by Troutwood.